Getting started today, a quick outline of our plan. We're going to do a quick introduction. I'm going to tell you a little bit about FINE and our work around foodware. And then I'm going to hand things over to our speakers. We're joined by Andy Cox, the Executive Director of Auxiliary Services at Smith College, and also Sue Chiang, who's the Food Program Director at the Center for Environmental Health. After their presentations, we're going to have some time for questions and discussions. We have set this webinar up actually so that we can have a little bit more dialogue between speakers and audience. We want to make sure that you leave here with actionable information so that you can improve the foodware at your institution or get involved in whatever way makes sense for the role that you're playing. We're going to have a couple of polls during this webinar. And then we'll also, at the end, after the presentations, make time for questions. And then we're also going to give folks the option of joining Sue and Andy in breakout rooms so that you can ask questions of our speakers that maybe are more individualized. We want to make sure that you have time to ask things that are really relevant to you. So a little bit of generic question and answer, things that might be relevant to the whole group. And then also an opportunity to really ask things that might help you at your institution or in your role. And then also we are going to leave you with some helpful resources, which you can also find on FINE's website. We have a PFAS and foodware webpage where we're trying to keep updated with helpful and useful information. So before I hand things over to our speakers, I just would like to tell those of you who maybe are less familiar with FINE a little bit about us. Farm to Institution New England is a cross-sector network backbone organization, which means that we're here to support all the folks working on farm to institution around New England. Our mission is to mobilize the power of New England institutions to transform our food system. Our vision is for a food system that is more just, equitable, and sustainable. And we're looking to support all of you who are also working on that vision. We work actively with K through 12 schools, colleges and universities, hospitals, correctional facilities, and we also have a new initiative with partners in the early childhood education sector. And for more information about FINE, you can check out our website, farmtoinstitution.org. So as part of our work with higher education, the campus sector, FINE supports and helps coordinate the New England Farm and Sea to Campus Network. This is a community of people working in and with higher education and food systems. It includes dining directors, farmers, supply chain actors, faculty, students, all who are interested in making a difference on campus and thinking about the role that colleges and universities play in our food system. During the pandemic, FINE was offering this community various ways to connect and to share with their colleagues and to learn from each other. And that sort of leads us to what we're talking about here today. One significant change that colleges and institutions were dealing with was the rise of what we call grab-and-go dining. Grab-and-go dining basically was something that really was already in existence, but became much more prevalent during COVID, partly out of safety reasons, needing to have students isolated in their dorm rooms. They couldn't come into the dining halls. There were a lot of challenges around that. But one thing that happened was a massive increase in packaging waste. On this slide, I'm sharing an example from Brandeis University, who worked with a team of students from Smith College who was really exploring the issue of growing waste on campus. So many institutions, like I said, were abandoning their reusable options and had to go with single-use foodware to support this kind of grab-and-go dining. And the students took a deeper look at this, and through various surveys, they got a lot of great information. We have the full report available on our website. But this is a great example from Brandeis that just shows how severe the problem was. In fall of 2019, there was about 4,200 pounds of packaging waste. By fall of 2020, even with 33% fewer students participating in their meal plan, they had gone up to 20,000 pounds of packaging waste. And so during that COVID period, the average student was producing 10 pounds of packaging waste compared to 1.4 pounds prior to COVID, which is it's sort of mind-boggling. One of the things that we were then recognizing, was that along with this increase in packaging waste was a concern about what foodware is made of and what that meant for what was going into the waste stream in increasing amounts. One of the things that we were particularly concerned about is something called PFAS. So I'm going to just take a moment now because I'd like to learn a little bit more about what you all know about PFAS. So our first poll is here, which is how familiar are you with the impacts that PFAS products, PFAS containing products can have on human and environmental health? You don't know what they are. You've heard of them, but not really sure about the impacts. You're somewhat familiar with PFAS and their impacts, or you are very familiar with the issue already. All right. Thank you all for answering. We've got a few people who haven't answered. Hopefully you'll click on one of these real quick so I can close the poll and share it. All right. So it looks like most of you are somewhat familiar. At least 50% are somewhat familiar and 36% are very familiar, which is great. And then there's a few of you who are not really maybe so sure what these are and would love a little bit more information. So we're going to make sure to give you the basics. And then throughout the course of the webinar, you're going to hear a lot more and learn a lot more. Thanks for that. All right. So what are PFAS? They are a class of chemicals. So not just one type of chemical, but a whole class of thousands and thousands. And they are widely used for certain properties, including the fact that they are water repellent, fat repellent. That means they keep away water and grease and oils. They're really persistent in the environment. And they don't go away, and they are known to be harmful to human and animal health. So this is obviously a concern. Now, why are we talking about PFAS, especially an organization like FINE? It's because of those properties of being water and fat repellent that they're used in food packaging, along with a lot of other types of items. But our focus today is around food packaging. They're used in things like microwave popcorn bags, sandwich wrappers, fast food wrappers, but also takeout containers. And so one of the things that we were thinking about is, okay, well, if we're having a lot more takeout containers going through the schools and ending up in the waste stream, what really are the risks around that? And there's a lot to be concerned about because PFAS has been found throughout the environment. When searched for, it's being found in higher and higher concentrations. And it's really concerning because of those potential impacts to human health. And there's a lot of unknowns, but we do know that PFAS goes from food packaging into landfills and into compost. They're they're used to treat compostable materials in particular. So schools who maybe and institutions that are thinking that they're making better choices by choosing compostables might be reducing sort of like solid waste, but maybe adding this new concern into this action that they're taking. In a desire to be more sustainable, there may be these other unknown ramifications. So we wanted to make sure that we were taking a deeper look at this and understanding what that meant. And then once it's in the waste stream, it also can find its way into our agricultural system and then back into the food that's grown. And there's this vicious cycle of increasing quantities of PFAS and increasing potential for exposure. This is just a brief overview. Sue Chiang, one of our speakers, is really an expert on this, so she's going to go into a lot more detail, but I wanted to give you a little bit of an overview before we started talking about the details of this project and the work that FINE has done with Smith and CEH around this. So a little bit of an overview. So once we started becoming aware that this could be an issue that we really should be concerned about, we decided that we wanted to take a little deeper action. We wanted to explore this issue further and kind of understand a little bit better about what kind of risk we were talking about at institutions from this rise in grab-and-go dining. So we applied to the Environmental Protection Agency's Healthy Communities Grant Program, and we're really grateful for the support that they gave to enable us to start this project and to work with Smith College, really taking a deeper look at this, at these issues. at a specific college campus so we could really kind of understand the nuances and be able to provide better support to institutions who wanted to tackle this issue. I'm now going to hand things over to Andy, who is going to talk about the role that Smith played in this and also really give you insight into sort of what a journey looks like into more sustainable foodware from a dining operator standpoint. Andy is a longtime Fine advisor. He's been really active member of the Farm and Seeded Campus Network. And as I said, he's been leading Smith's dining program for a number of years now. Andy, as we start handing things over to you, I also want to launch our second poll. I would love to know, for those of you who are either at an institution, connected to an institution, or perhaps involved in decisions about foodware, we would love to know if you are using compostables. So I am now going to launch our next poll, which is here. Are you using compostable foodware in your dining hall? And it's okay if this is not relevant to you, you don't have to answer, but for those of you who can answer this question, we'd love to hear what your choices are right now. And Andy, if you want to go ahead and start sharing your screen, then we'll have you take over the presentation at this point.
All right. Sure. I thought sharing my slides with you yesterday meant you were going to add them to the deck, so let me just bring them up.
Oh, so sorry. I can do that for you if you like.
Either way, I found it.
All right. While you're doing that, I'm going to go ahead and share our results from this poll. So right now, 44% are not using compostables. Maybe in our discussion period, you'll be able to let us know what you are using. 11% are using compostables, or you suspect that they're going into compost as well. And then about a third are using compostables, but not sure where they're going from there. And then 11% are using compostables and know that they are PFAS-free, which is really exciting. I'm glad to hear that. And we'll love to hear some of your stories as well at the end. All right.
All right. I'm going to steal the screen. Good?
Great. Thanks, Andy.
Yeah. And yeah, thank you for the introduction. Yeah, I think when I started this journey, I was on that sort of, I'd heard of PFAS. I knew they were bad, but didn't know too much about them. So that sort of led us into a rabbit hole, but we'll get into that. So we knew that just the sheer volume of waste was bad for compostable use. So we actually had eliminated pretty much all single use on campus in 2017 when we went to, you see these on the screen, the OZ is the brand. It's just a reusable container. We basically, aside from, I would say, napkins and a few of the retail locations, our residential dining had gone single-use free, which was great. We thought we were well prepared for the pandemic, but our local health department said we couldn't use China or reusables. So we always had to go to single-use exclusively. We had a little time to prepare, right? Like most campuses, we sent the majority of students home. So as we were planning for the fall, we spent a lot of time thinking about what we were going to buy. And now I'd say we have sort of a mix of a little bit of everything. But here's sort of our plan going into the fall semester, where we're going to invite about, or I guess it was spring. So we were totally vacant besides international students who couldn't leave the country in the fall. So in the spring, we said, we're going to stick to these 16 products. We sourced them from what we thought were sustainable sources, right? So we probably just went by brand name, right? Like Green Wave or Eco Product. There weren't a lot of certifications or data in our broadline distributor to inform what we were going to buy, but we wanted to stick to 100% compostable program so that we could divert as much waste as possible, knowing that we weren't going to be able to use reusables when students returned in large volume. And then the supply chain realities hit. I don't know if anybody else had the same purchasing disasters we had. So the best laid plans of we're going to stick to these products, and we programmed them into our order guides. We found out through this process, we were buying 253 different products. Some of them were chefs realizing in the moment that the product they were supposed to buy wasn't available and switching it. Some were just the distributor changing it on our behalf. So we realized very quickly that we had no control at this point in time over the supply chain. And that's when we, had this opportunity to work with students. So we had Amy and Maxine who were in getting course credit to do this project with Fine and the EPA. So we sort of shared as much data as we could because it was coming in so fast, and we really had no way to react in real time to what was actually available to us. So they were the ones who were going through like 253 different products and trying to do the research on our behalf. So here's like one of the spreadsheets that they went through. So we initially gave them our September reports so they could at least get the names of the players, right? So they started reaching out to all the distributors, who then put them in touch with the vendors of the product. So it was a arduous process. By the time October, November reports came around, it had expanded even more, but they were pretty familiar with the brands at that point. So while we were buying different products a month later, the branding was pretty much the same. And as we found out that things like eco product and green wave don't necessarily mean sustainable or PFAS-free or any of that. But they basically categorized all of our products for us by either it was PFAS-free, they could verify it, or that it definitely had PFAS in it, and they could, it was information available that said that. But the majority of it was unknown, right? So it led us to sort of say like, all right, well, we know what we shouldn't buy, we know what we should buy, but the majority of it was just sort of up in the air. A lot of that was stuff that was just getting switched into our dining halls by the vendors, just so that we would have something to serve students on. And just to clarify, the red means good, the green means bad. I don't know, I didn't have access to the file on this, just it was just shared with me from the students. So so we were at 25% PFAS free. And most of that were products that we were actually attempting to buy at the beginning of the pandemic anyway. But this was really helpful because we knew what we should get rid of immediately, and then sort of bought the unknown on an as needed basis. Like if we just had to have a 9-inch clamshell, we would go with something unknown rather than, we knew it contained PFAS at that point. So I would say like the big takeaways were that we learned a lot about PFAS and how much effort we really did need to pay attention to this. We obviously learned that the eco-friendly brands or the greenwashing doesn't necessarily mean PFAS free, so don't take anybody's word for that. You're going to pay more for PFAS. So, if you can buy PFAS-free certified products for things that are going to be in contact with hot, wet, greasy food, and sort of put your money where the highest percentage of PFAS relevance is going to be, right? So like if you're unclear, like make sure you're buying the PFAS for something that is going to be served with hot, greasy, wet food, because the likelihood of that product being made with PFAS is pretty high. And I guess it should go without saying that you should avoid single use whenever possible. So right now we still push reusable serviceware first, right? So we're back, obviously, China, and we still have some of the reusable containers. A lot of them lost their value to students and they wound up just throwing them out throughout the pandemic. So we have far fewer of the reusable containers, but people are allowed to dine in again. So we're back to China and silverware. But we have eliminated all clamshells, right? So there was a high probability that most of those products are going to have PFAS in them. We do offer plates if a dishwasher goes down, right? So we need to have some backup available if we can't clean China. So we are buying BPI certified. So BPI is the Biodegradable Products Institute. So they're doing a certification in that if they certify it, it is PFAS free. Some of that language is actually available in our broadline vendors, US Foods. So we can see a product will say if it has a BPI certification on it, which is really helpful. When we know it needs to be water resistant, like a PLA line product might. So you're going to find that you can get, a corn-based lining is less likely to have PFAS in it as well. So. I know that we're going to have some questions at the end, but if there's anything I could clarify now, I thought I would give you an opportunity. I don't know, are people putting it in the chat? Is it coming
Yeah,
off?
thanks, Andy. There aren't any questions in the chat right now, but feel free to
Great.
enter your questions as you have them, and we can answer them either now or at the end. All right. Our next speaker is Sue Chiang, and Sue was really an incredible resource for us throughout this project and throughout our exploration and trying to understand more about PFAS and the potential risks. And so we invited Sue to join us to provide a deeper dive and provide that real technical information as well. So Sue, let me hand things over to you.
Okay. Thank you. So I am just setting it up to share my screen. Hopefully that will work. And I just have to get my presentation back up. All right. Can everybody see that? Okay, thank you. So thanks for that great presentation, Andy, and for the introduction, Tanya. My name is Sue Chiang. I am the Food Program Director at the Center for Environmental Health. CEH is a national nonprofit organization that works to protect people and the environment from toxic chemicals using science, policy, litigation, community partnerships, and market strategies to create real, tangible wins for public health. So as many of you know, it can be quite difficult to pass strong policies restricting toxic chemicals. So one effective way to drive change in the marketplace is through environmentally preferable purchasing. At CEH, we work with purchasers, designers, facility staff, manufacturers, and others to get toxic chemicals out of products and supply chains, driving the market towards safer products for everyone. So I'm not going to spend much time on this because, you know, I think with environmental issues, more people are aware about waste because it's something it's easy to see and visualize. But there's a lot more to the story behind the life cycle of the products that we use and encounter every day. So I will just jump right to really, you know, I think with toxic chemicals, you know, those are much harder to see and have a sense of how they might impact our health, either immediately or years down the line in the future. And so there's a number of concerns with disposable products that we use to cook, serve, and store our food in, but I will mainly focus on the toxic chemicals as that's our topic today. And, you know, it's really more than just a waste issue, and it's more than a plastics issue too. But we will be talking about toxics. So what I really want to highlight during this webinar today is that, you know, there's toxic chemicals in everyday products, and especially it's concerning for foodware. And just because something is legal doesn't mean that it's not hazardous. Most people would assume that foodware and food packaging do not contain toxic ingredients, but unfortunately that's not the case. There's over 12,000 chemicals that have been approved for use in the production of food contact materials globally, and some of them are known to cause harm like cancer, birth defects, and impaired fertility. Moreover, most chemicals on the market haven't been thoroughly evaluated for their toxicity. So I wanted to just show you two examples of very common disposable foodware products. The top one is expanded polystyrene foam, or EPS, often referred to as styrofoam. And the second product, which was already mentioned, I think, is a molded fiber clamshell that's often seen as an eco-friendly alternative to the EPS product above. But unfortunately, as you just heard, this type of fiber-based product can contain harmful substances known as PFAS chemicals. So I'll talk a little bit more about each of these in the next couple slides. But the main chemical building block for making these polystyrene containers is styrene, which is a carcinogen, and it's been shown to leach out from the products and can get into the food or beverage that the products are containing. And benzene, which is a byproduct of the petroleum industry, is also used to make these products. And there's a number of other issues that I'm sure you're all familiar with about polystyrene or styrofoam products that I'm not going to go into today. But when it comes to PFAS, Tanya already talked a little bit about it. The numbers actually increased to, they believe, 15,000 different chemicals in this class of compounds. And the reason they are nicknamed the forever chemicals is because they have one of the strongest bonds known to chemistry is the carbon-fluorine bond. So that makes them extremely persistent, and they don't break down in the natural environment. And so they can be found, in all sorts of media around our planet, as well as in our bodies. They are detected in soil, air, water, and food. And they can build up or bioaccumulate in fish and wildlife. So, as Tanya mentioned, with the molded fiber products that everybody's using, and before BPI and the Compost Manufacturing Alliance changed their restrictions for, the certified products, they didn't know about PFAS initially, and those were being certified and allowed to go into our compost facilities. Now, BPI and CMA have changed their restrictions to no longer allow that. And so they should not be going into the compost if you buy those certified products. As far as the health impacts, there are a wide range of adverse health effects associated with the various different compounds. As I mentioned, there's already over 15,000 that are in the class. So there's different health effects associated with the different compounds within the class. But some of the effects have been shown to be like hormone system disruption, a range of cancers, behavioral and learning disorders, and a lot more. And unfortunately, children are especially vulnerable to these toxic chemicals and can be exposed by handling or eating food that was served on the products that contain them. Another point I just really want to make quickly is that studies have found that exposure to PFAS has been shown to lower the effectiveness of vaccines by reducing the effectiveness of our immune systems. And that is of particular concern given the current issue with COVID and other, diseases that are circulating right now. So, now that we're aware of PFAS and styrene in some of these fiber-based products and the foam or number 6 plastics, respectively, these are just two key ingredients that we happen to know about. The industry doesn't have to tell us what else is in these products. Manufacturers may tell you that everything is FDA approved, but the reality is that doesn't really mean much because FDA is wildly under-resourced and isn't adequately protecting us in this area. So, we don't know what else might be in these products, unfortunately. And I did want to say that, you may see those chasing arrows with the number inside, and that's actually a resin identification code. And there's been talk about legislation to change these symbols because it's very misleading. People will think that this means these products are recyclable, and really the numbers are just there to indicate what type of plastic is there. And there's a few in particular that we already know have potential health concerns and that we don't recommend using. So I wanted to highlight number 3 is polyvinyl chloride or vinyl, and it's made from vinyl chloride, which is a carcinogen. We already talked about number 6, which is polystyrene. It could be in a foam or rigid plastic form, and we're concerned about styrene as a carcinogen as well as benzene. And then number 7 is actually a catch-all for any other plastic that is not covered by 1 through 6. But polycarbonate, we're very concerned about because of bisphenol A as a main building block, which is an endocrine disruptor. And then melamine products are made using formaldehyde, which is a carcinogen. So, we're concerned about the use of toxic ingredients in these products, and not just during the use phase, because these products have a lifespan and a life cycle. These toxic chemicals will affect our health and the environment throughout their whole life cycle, from extraction to production to sale, et cetera, through to end of use. So there's other concerns about plastic. There's growing evidence of, PFAS actually being used in plastic containers and other products. A few other concerns with plastic include the fact that while we often think of plastic as impervious, it can actually absorb and transfer chemicals, just like it can hold on to the residue from food that's been stored in it. There's also risk of chemicals being released when plastics are exposed to high temperatures or harsh substances. And plastics are not only made out of oil and gas, they're made in energy-intensive processes that contribute to climate change. There's also a number of issues when plastic reaches the end of its useful time. Someone in the movement pointed out that plastic does not have a life cycle, but more like a lifespan, as it degrades over time and isn't well suited to a circular economy. Many plastics are either not recyclable or are difficult to recycle as facilities are scarce. Estimates of plastic recycling in the US are hovering around 5 to 6% at the moment, and so much of our plastic waste ends up in landfills. These low recycling rates, combined with the abundance of plastic pollution and new restrictions from countries that previously had accepted plastic waste from the US, have created one particularly dangerous threat. To deal with the glut of plastic waste, the petrochemical and plastic industries are now promoting so-called chemical recycling, which is essentially a form of plastic incineration. These industries claim that chemical recycling can turn plastic waste into energy or into chemicals that can be used to create new plastic materials. Not only have they failed to prove this, but data indicate that chemical recycling creates hazardous waste and air pollution and is also very energy intensive. These industries are lobbying to make chemical recycling facilities exempt from the Clean Air Act. And they're also cited in communities of color and low-income communities. So like the rest of the petrochemical build-out, chemical recycling is also an issue of environmental justice. And then lastly, I just want to say that most plastic eventually breaks down into micro and nanoplastics, which also absorb and transport chemicals. Microplastics have not only found in the digestive system of humans and other animals, but also in the blood, brains, lung, placenta, and other organs. And for all these reasons, we're encouraging food service operations to really consider alternative materials whenever possible. So I wanted to really focus and talk about the certification that just got launched this month. And so, while there's great development in terms of all these restrictions happening on PFAS and companies getting out of it, there's still problems with, we don't know what other ingredients or what they're using instead of PFAS, and they aren't willing to make this information public. So the best way to get a good sense of what is going into the products is through a certification program where companies can have the assurance of confidentiality about their special ingredients, but also offer the purchasers assurance about the credibility of the information. So this new certification called GreenScreen Certified, there's two that have been launched now. One is for single-use food serviceware and thermal paper, which is used for receipts. And the second one that just was released is on reusable food packaging, serviceware, and cookware. And there's three tiers: silver, gold, and platinum. So what makes GreenScreen Certified so important is that it uses a scientifically robust hazard-based approach that's transparent, and it creates a structure for identifying preferred chemistry and materials and products in the food service industry. And so, it helps because it has a framework where all chemical ingredients need to be disclosed and assessed for chemical hazard through a trusted third party. So we have two independent nonprofit organizations. CEH partnered with another national organization called Clean Production Action. It's a comprehensive and detailed approach to evaluate these chemicals. It facilitates communication along the supply chain and avoids regrettable substitution of one chemical for another, and it creates a roadmap for the industry. So here's just a quick overview of what's included in the single-use foodware standard. It's products that are designed to be compostable or recyclable. So they would have to have either BPI certification or be considered recyclable in order to be eligible to get certified. It also covers any materials that are used in disposable food serviceware that are designed to be compostable or recyclable. And then, as I mentioned, we more recently added thermal paper, which is used for receipts. For reusables, it's actually an expanded scope. It includes not just food serviceware, but food storage and food packaging and cookware products, as well as the materials that are used into these. So as I mentioned, all materials have to be disclosed under confidentiality. Anything intentionally added and present at or above 1 part per million in the material, and for impurities or residuals, it's above 100 parts per million. This is just an example of one of the analytical testing requirements for the standard, which is for PFAS, but there's a number of different chemicals of concern that the companies would need to test their products for. And the standard restricts major chemicals of concern in these categories of carcinogens, mutagens, persistent bioaccumulative and toxic chemicals, endocrine disruptors, et cetera. And then there's a restricted substances list that is tailored specifically for this food sector industry. And so you can see the list of the chemical classes and particular chemicals that are restricted here. And everything is listed in the standard itself. And this is just a quick summary to show you all the things that are included. But again, you know, the certification requires that these chemicals are disclosed, the hazards are assessed, they must meet all the restricted substance list requirements and do analytical testing. And then you can see for single use what's included versus reusables. So I'd love to answer any questions if people have them about what I've talked about.
Sue, thank you so much. Really appreciate it. And I'm so glad that you and Andy could join us today. We are going to spend some time opening things up to discussion, but I'm going to share my screen one more time because I want to share a few resources with you all. There's obviously a lot to be concerned about, but there are a lot of really great actions that you can take. There are resources out there to help you. FINE is trying to help compile some of them. CEH also has, Center for Environmental Health also has many great resources on their website. And we encourage you to check out our website here, farmtoinstitution.org, PFAS and Foodware, where we do a quick summary of the issues. We share some of these resources, and we also have like a handy sort of printable PDF for you to use. If you want to use that, it's great for helping share information within your institution or with an institution that you care about to help raise awareness and to let them know what they can do. FINE is also here and available if you have questions, if you have concerns, if you want to talk more about your situation or have questions that you want to follow up with. We are happy to follow up and continue to be a resource, so please don't hesitate to reach out. If you are part of the campus community, the higher education community, there are many ways for you to continue to connect with FINE and peers. We have a dining operators listserv, which is actually available to all, not just the higher ed sector, but to all institutional dining directors and folks involved with procurement. We also have a Facebook group where we share lots of information and where you can share information about what's happening at your institution. And like I said, I'm available to help connect you to other resources as well. We have another webinar coming up next month on October 19th, where we're going to be joined by Kathy Wicks and Monica Gizik of UMass Amherst, their sustainability program. They'll be talking about student engagement and launching new initiatives with a focus on their Dining for a Cooler Planet program. So that'll be a great opportunity to learn more about engaging students, maintaining student engagement, helping with education programs, which, as Andy can also talk about, has been really an instrumental piece of their work to change what's happening with foodware at their dining hall. So with that, what I would like to do then is open it up to questions. And while I'm getting ready to answer your questions and have our speakers help answer your questions, I'd also like to launch just 2 more polls where I have a couple questions for you. And these are the last 2, I promise. So with the next one, what we'd like to learn is if this webinar helped with your understanding. So I know many of you came in with a lot of information about PFAS. We're hoping that we provided you with details that are useful and contribute to that knowledge. and that also will help you take action with that information. So thank you for answering this poll. It looks like we appreciate it. It looks like most of you are saying that it has been helpful, and that is our goal. So if there are things that we could do to improve, if there are questions that you have, if there are other topics you'd like to hear us cover, please feel free to let us know. We'd love to hear about that. All right. And lastly, here's just how it panned out. Thank you for contributing to that information. And then lastly, what we'd like to know is if there is, oh no. All right, well, this poll is not launching for me for some reason. I'm not sure what happened there, but the question is there one action that you are inspired to take after this webinar? Just feel free to put that in the chat, or if you would like to ask a question, if you would like to contribute an answer to the question I just asked you about what actions you might take, we'd love to invite you to come off of mute and share that question. You can either do it in the chat or you can go live. We're happy either way. We'd love to hear from you. All right, so we have a few questions coming up. Let's see. Diane Emery asks, could Andy talk more about the operations of OZI? Do you charge for the containers? Do you have data on loss?
We do not charge for the containers, and we do have return data, or we did, I would say. So Smith Dining residential program is a little dispersed. So we operate 12 different dining rooms across campus. So we had, if you're familiar with the brand OZI, they have sort of reverse vending machines where you return the containers and they get scanned in a barcode. So we had 3 of those on campus and in strategic locations so that it was somewhat convenient for you. And we launched pre-pandemic, and we had, according to OZI, the best return rates in the country. We had about 90% of them get returned each year. In fact, we bought 2 containers and leased 1, and the lease agreement came with a requirement to buy more containers. And we found we didn't even need them when we had to buy them, which OZI themselves were shocked by. But we decided not to charge because we wanted to make it universally accessible. Unfortunately, when we went back to it after the pandemic, just the nature of our students had changed and the value they placed on it without having any monetary value decreased. And we actually saw a significant decrease. So I'm not entirely sure what changed. We tried communicating a lot, but we also removed the restriction that you had to return it to one of the 3 locations and said you can return it to the closest kitchen, right? So we actually stopped tracking any data at all in an effort to try and increase the return rates, saying you could bring it wherever you want. So we don't really have data after it got worse, unfortunately. But if you use the return receptacle and or have 1 point of return or a convenient number of dining locations where you can actually monitor it, I don't think you necessarily have to charge students for it. And it's just more equitable that way.
Thanks, Andy. We have another question from Barb Haskell. Barb, do you want to unmute and ask, or should I just read from here?
I can unmute. My question was just if there was any recommendation for lighter reusable ware, because generally what most people go to is the melamine plates and bowls, which is what we had used previous to COVID, but we're in a very small hospital here, and we're experiencing everything that Andy had talked about, the 200 different types of containers, and you're not really sure what you're receiving week to week. And unfortunately, we really haven't seen much of that settling down and consistency. So I'm just trying to pause and look at our food service program again and see what are the type of containers that are safe, that would be a good alternative, and just reduce the amount of waste going in our landfill.
That's a great question, Barb. Thank you. Sue, do you want to tackle that one first? And then Andy, also, we can hear from you about what your choices have been.
And sorry, Barb, are you looking for like closed containers or just kind of plates and those kinds of?
I think both, but probably something that's comparable to Andy's clamshell, because we're a very small hospital, but we have a primary care site on our campus. So most of our people are grabbing and going back to the primary care office.
Yeah, I think the containers can be a little tricky, but yeah, there are stainless steel options. I know for we're working a lot with K through 12 schools, and some of the trays are actually not that heavy. They're pretty light, and the kids seem to really like it. And then it looks like maybe Andy's been putting some in the chat, some options here. I think there are some that are using a stainless steel container as well, but I know the cost can kind of be a little prohibitive up front. But I am seeing, I think as there's more an expanded interest in reusables, I think there will be sort of more options coming to market and more types of products and hopefully more materials.
Yeah, on that front, I would encourage people to have conversations with your suppliers about this, because that really can help make a difference in terms of what's offered. During the course of this project, one of the things to get information about products, we were talking to different suppliers and different manufacturers, and some were really forthcoming, some weren't, which is why there was still a lot of unknowns in there. But most of them were really interested in hearing that this was something that there was a concern about. And so the more people can ask about it, I think the more influence that will have on what's available and what the costs are ultimately too. If anyone in the audience also has suggestions or ideas or wants to share what they're using, feel free to post that into the chat too. It's great to crowdsource info. Andy, do you want to talk any more about either those stainless steel or other options that you've looked at?
No, I put it all in the chat if anybody's curious. I'm not as familiar with it. I know that one of our sister schools uses it, so that's my only exposure to it. I do want to mention one other thing that I forgot about, that if you are in sort of the single-use product category and you can't find certified, you can eliminate some choices in vendors who are national, because they have to have the California state warning, right? So like if you're looking at a product and you aren't sure whether it has, and California thinks it's potentially hazardous, don't buy it. So that's one trick I found, is that like if you can't find enough information on it and it's a national vendor, then they're going to have the California state warnings for chemicals.
Yep. And I did want to add that several states have actually banned PFAS in foodware and this disposable foodware. I will find the link and I can share information about which states have done that.
And actually, New England is leading the way on some of that. Maine is one of them. There's a lot of work happening in Maine around this issue. I think we might have a couple of folks on the call who are working on this in Maine. If there's anything you want to contribute into this conversation, we'd love to hear from you, either in the chat or feel free to raise your hand or unmute. Also, Andy, I think this sort of was touched on, but I think that cost is always obviously an important factor in any purchasing decisions. And as you noted, it can be more expensive to switch to PFAS-free items. And there are resources available to talk a little bit about that, but would love to know if you have some guidance on that, on making the case for making the budget changes that are necessary to support this.
Sure, I would say when the pandemic hit, nobody cared about the cost. So, but again, finding the right products that were branded and communicated to us was difficult, and there was lots of substitution. So now that we are sort of in a hybrid system, I would say. We still push the reusable, right? So like we're not actually throwing out a plate per student per meal per day, right? So like we're limiting our exposure on actually serving single use. So financially, it's not that bad. And I mean, we're buying it through Broadliner. We're not, buying specialty products. And yeah, it hasn't been that bad. So we went from like not serving any to going straight to compostable. So it's not like we were switching from a styrofoam anyway, or even a single use China paper plate. So we already had like the price of compostable. So like it's not, I would say it's within 10% for most of the products from where we already were. And it's not a huge exposure. But yeah, if you can only serve on single use, it's obviously going to have a much larger impact.
One thing I know from working with you and with the students was that student voice was also really useful. Students became concerned. Obviously, this is their bodies, their risk that they're dealing with. And in a sense, college students and young children are particularly vulnerable populations to potential chemical toxicity. So engaging students, getting their support, and working with the sustainability office in your school, if you have one, or a sustainability person, can be a good, another good resource to help bolster, your case for things.
Yeah, I guess I'll add on. So the Sophian is the student newspaper, and I guess there was a member from the club that runs the paper at the presentation for the capstone project that worked on this. And they wrote an essay in the student newspaper about how we're killing all the students. And so the president got really involved and wanted to know, like, what are we doing? And we're like, so to the best of our ability, we're like, well, we're choosing products that have it, and we're getting opted out in the supply chain a lot of the time. But we definitely got students to add institutional support to it when the student newspaper picked it up and said, you need to get rid of all these.
Yeah, thanks. Does anyone else have any questions? We will also take a minute here to, let's see. The plan was to put people into breakout rooms so people could talk one-on-one with Andy or Sue. So we'll go ahead and do that. And if that's not of interest to you, I thank you for joining us and encourage you to share, once you get the link for this presentation, share it with your peers, with anyone you think might be interested, with folks at your institution. And if you have any follow-up questions, if we can provide additional support, like I said, please don't hesitate to reach out. Let's see, I'm seeing one hand. Who is that?
It's just me.
Oh, that's you, Sue. Sorry. There you are.
Oh, I just wanted to say before people hopped off that, one of the reasons we're working with the K through 12 schools is because we see a need to have a culture change, and that right now, a lot of the schools, we're teaching the kids to throw stuff away every day. So it's what they're used to. And right now it's been great trying to make that switch. And I think as the kids, go through all the different stages to middle and high school and college, they'll start to learn this other system, that it's the norm that we have reusables.
That's an excellent point. Thanks for that. And Sue shared their toolkit in the chat, which is another great resource. We've also shared it on our website. I encourage you to check it out. And okay, Sarah, do you want to offer up the breakout rooms, and we'll see if folks want to do a little one-on-one with our speakers.